Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Toby Birch, who is a senior investment manager at Gower Financial Services. We're going to review the second quarter of 2025 and then look at other factors impacting world markets. Now, just to remind you, all opinions are personal and no investment advice is being given. Good to see you as ever.
Hello again, Tony. Good to see you too.
What happened to the first half of the year? It whizzed by, didn't it?
Yeah, it just seemed to shoot by, and it just every quarter just keeps. It's like a treadmill. You just keep going round and round, and you're back again.
I must apologise to the viewers that my picture's a little bit on the dark side. One of our circuits, our lighting circuits, has tripped out, and we're getting it fixed tomorrow. So if you don't want to see me in the dark, shut your eyes and listen.
Skip the light, fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with a quick review over the last 3 months of the major stock markets. Um, Looking quite impressive, aren't they?
I mean, on the surface, it looks pretty good. So you got sort of double-digit gains all over the place in local currency terms. So you got America as usual, sort of powering ahead. FTSE 100's done pretty well, and it all on the surface looks fine. But you've got to bear in mind that we had a very brutal sell-off from February to April. Some US markets were off around 20%, which is what you call a bear market territory. And so really just having a sort of a V-shaped recovery back to
Yeah.
where you were. So you do have record highs around, but it's got to be put into context, I think.
The great thing about these sort of stats is that they ignore the dips and the
Yeah,
peaks in between,
that's
don't
right.
they?
Yeah, if you do the year to date, it's a bit more sobering and not
Well,
as,
just let's recap for the benefit of our friends, our audience. The FTSE 250 up by 10.31% over the quarter. Standard and Poor's 11.45, and Japan up 9.2%. So, yeah, I mean, it looks good, but as you say, it's really sort of analysing it, which of course is part of your job, isn't it?
that's right. I mean, it's a bit like this. When people talk about climate change and having these like big spikes. You're kind of looking at one little narrow part and then
Yeah,
interpreting data to suit your agenda.
yeah, yeah,
We'll talk
yeah.
about that later.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just so that keeping on the business of energy, checked out Brent crude last week. That was down to $65 a barrel, which compared with earlier months and earlier shows we've done, isn't too bad, I guess.
Yes, same with the WTI, the American version. That's looking about the same, about $65, and
Yeah.
had peaked around the $80 mark at the beginning of the year. So it just goes to show whatever's going in the headlines doesn't translate into what's going on in markets or commodity prices. It's almost always the opposite for some reason.
How's sterling shaping up against the euro and the dollar?
But it's a bit weak against the euro. But I think it's more of a case of dollar weakness when you come to what's called the old cable rate. So the dollar's lost 10% this year, which is pretty unusual. And so for sterling investors, when we invest in the States, for example, this year, talk about the S&P 500 and NASDAQ, you'd actually be losing money as a sterling investor in spite of all these record highs. So currency plays a big part. And normally it's to our benefit because the pound's weakening, but this time around, you've got 10% strength, which is really, really a big headwind for investors.
Yeah, so essentially, at the moment it costs more to acquire that investment in sterling
Um,
terms.
well, in a way, if you've put money into America or the dollars at the beginning of the year, then you've lost money
Yeah,
effectively.
yeah.
But if you're going as a tourist, it's good because you're buying more dollars, more bang for your buck, as they say.
I can remember when it was dollars 40 to the
Just
pound.
yeah, about the same as well.
Oh dear, but that's going back into prehistoric times. Um, how do you see interest rates? Bank of England put the last lot on hold, didn't they?
I think rightly so. I mean, the UK has got fairly sticky inflation, and maybe the stronger pound will help curtail that a bit. But in the States, we're looking at September is the earliest time to cut rates, and the kind of the sort of Goldman Sachs or standard market view is that they'll get 3 quarter point cuts going into the end of the year. So that's probably helped with making the dollar weaker in the first place. But on the whole, I think for most of Americans, and obviously they're the biggest consumers and have the greatest effect on markets. The fact that their long-term interest rates are still above 7% means they can't refinance their homes and get draw money out of their property. So that long-term mortgage rate is more important than short-term rate cuts, effectively.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, in the States, can they, buy a fixed rate over a certain period of time, or?
I mean, typically their mortgages are based on the 30-year yield, which recently had got above 5%, which is quite damaging. But just in the last week or two, you've seen bond yields come down, which is good all round for markets and good for the homeowners as well, because they see more yield declines. It means they can reset their mortgage at lower rates in the future. So yeah, it's unexpected, but yeah, good news for us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. UK inflation rate, a little bit up and down at the moment. Quite a bit, really, isn't it? In fractions of a percent over and above the target of 2%.
Yeah, same in the States as well. But yeah, as we discussed before, we tend to try and strip out the shorter term
Yeah.
aspects of food and energy, and look at the core rate. And in the past, in America, that's been used as an excuse to make inflation look better than it really is, because the shelter costs were always quite suppressed, and that's flipped around. So the core rate is still a bit on the high side.
Is it fair to say governments like inflation, or whilst they never admit it, it gets them out of a financial hole?
It's in the long term, yes, because you're trying to devalue the level of your debt, and in our case, in the Western world generally, the burden is so high compared to the past. Not so much the war years, but it needs just like a steady devaluation, so that future taxes can pay off more of the debt. Not that it ever is paid off, but in general, I think governments like a sort of creeping inflation rate, but they want to make the headline rates look less, so you don't have to have big pay awards to the public service. Although Labour Party seem to have done the opposite.
I'm too old to take up train driving professionally.
Well, it is your expertise, apparently.
Of course, one of the things that's really been affecting the UK inflation rate is the sort of grocery inflation that we've seen, currently standing at 4.7%. And I mean that is quite a chunk, isn't it?
I mean, I'd love to live in these places where we have these grocery inflation rates like that, because certainly I think Jersey is probably the worst example where um, grocery prices are just escalating, and really impoverishing a lot of people in spite of being a wealthy island. But yeah, if it's all in context for UK people. They're not getting 5% wage increases, and yet these groceries keep on going up and up, along with everything else, of course.
Mm, mm. But if you take the Channel Islands, you can't put it all down to freight, can you? Must be a bit of profiteering going on somewhere
Exactly.
along the
Yeah,
line. Yeah, yeah,
definitely.
using it as a justification. Now, I thought we'd, have a little chat about supermarkets
Okay.
because, it's our sort of topic of the quarter, as it were. And I was amazed looking at the various percentages. Got the info from Kantar. Can you tell us a bit about Kantar before we get into the meat?
I mean, it's not a sector I followed that closely, but as in the sector itself, or Kantar for that matter, because from the point of view here, we don't have them on the island, apart from
No.
Morrison's did to a
Yeah.
minor extent. But I do know that the market share has been relatively stable
Mm,
recently.
mm.
With Sainsbury's, I think it's like one of these like races where certain ones nudge ahead of the other. I think Sainsbury's have got their highest market share of recent years.
But having said that, Tesco's are currently weighing in at 28% of the market.
Yeah, major. I'm sure there'll be.
Now,
It's like
at
all this
what
thing.
point do you get the monopolist people looking at these things?
It's just exactly what I was going to say. That as soon as you're too successful, then someone comes knocking on the door trying to kill the golden goose. And
Yeah.
ultimately, that if you take market share, there's a reason for it, and you're providing a good service and great prices. I know Marks and Spencer's been in the background as well. I know they're not on the list, but yeah, they're really very innovative, and trying to do the best. So we talk about grocery inflation. These large funds do help to offset that to a degree.
Sainsbury's was 15% of the market.
Yeah, yeah,
Asda 11. Now Asda's got major problems, I believe, hasn't it, in terms of its financing? Because it,
yes, yeah, that's right. It's often the case. We talked about sort of debt levels before, and the obviously with rates higher and long term rates higher, it pushes up the cost of financing. And you've seen extreme in cases in the case like Thames Water, for example, where there's like a tipping point. But I don't think we're there yet. But it does hurt these firms for sure.
interesting. Morrison's always claimed it was part of the Big Four,
Hmm.
but I now discover that Aldi have got 10% of the market, and Morrison's only 8. And Lidl are
Yeah,
close on their heels at 8
it,
themselves.
it's surprising. You kind of given the amount of advertising going on, you'd think they'd be punching above their weight a bit more. But so we can only dream of having these these supermarkets here.
It would appear that, as far as Morrison's are concerned, they are losing out substantially on the market. You'd
Well,
think
yeah,
they'd be well over 10, wouldn't you?
yeah. I mean, I know they're trying to get a foothold in the Channel Islands, and maybe that they're seeing the monopoly here. There's a being an advantage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Who knows? Right. One thing that did crop up the other day, which I'm sure you'll appreciate, is that Tesco's actually acknowledged all of the veterans service people, by giving them a free breakfast.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, yeah,
It's really
yeah.
big. It's just had an Armed Forces Day last week, I think it
That's
was.
right, and it was in connection with that apparently. So
That's great.
that shows promise.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause in the States, it's a very big thing to have, be a veteran. Obviously, you've got discounts at stores, and whereas in Britain, it's always a disadvantage.
Yeah, yeah.
My son's just had a tax bill for he's been based in Scotland, and there's an extra tax surcharge, so that's not very helpful. And nowadays, when I was in my youth doing military things, you get every train journey be a little docket for you to
Mm.
to claim it back. But in my son's case, he's got to, when he moves, let's say from south of England to Scotland, you've got to pay your own way to move. It's just little things that it's just a big drain on morale. So I'm glad Tesco are doing something to
And
counter
and
that.
and what really hurts me, Toby, is the fact that a lot of these guys come out of the armed forces. They've got major mental health problems, and
Yeah,
nobody seems to want to do anything about it.
that's right. They end up homeless, and other people
Yeah.
get priority on the housing ladder
Mm.
nowadays.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a real kick in the
It's
teeth all around, and
unfair.
and if
We should respect these people, and
yeah,
it would be good if we had more of a US attitude towards them. But there
I
we are.
agree.
Talking about US, President Trump. Well, that was interesting, wasn't it? The conflict with Iran.
Yeah,
Um,
it's really surprising. I mean, I'm just doing our quarterly commentary at the moment. I was thinking, when the Middle East is always in the headlines or causing some kind of issue, whether it's oil or otherwise. And I thought President Trump was more of an isolationist, like
mm,
sort of pre-World War II style. Um, and for him to intervene and to do this bunker busting thing was a real surprise from my point of view. I thought they'd just let the Israelis hammer it out themselves. But the fact he's joined in, it seems to, I don't know if it's stage managed or not, but it seems to make everyone look good because everyone sort of appears to be tough and saying that the right thing for their own domestic audience. But it seems to have de-escalated things, which is quite unusual because
yeah,
normally when you start off something military, you never know where it's going to end, and it always ends up
Iraq,
worse than you expect.
Afghanistan, you name
It's
it.
just don't.
But the thing is, of course, with the Iranians, you've got the Straits of Hormuz, uh, with all
yeah.
the
So
oil tankers coming through, and that's always going to be a difficult area geographically
yeah, I
speaking.
mean, less so than the past. I mean, 20% of daily oil usage equivalent goes through the Straits of Hormuz.
Mm.
Um, or Strait of Hormuz, I should say.
Mm.
But I think with the Americans becoming more independent, that it's less of an issue, but it's always got to have an effect. Particularly with drones nowadays, it's just such a powerful tool for attacking vessels or individuals, for that matter.
Okay, inevitably we've got to get onto the subject of tariffs. His philosophy seems to be shove it up high and negotiate.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
what,
negotiation.
yeah. Does it work?
It seems to have done it. Everyone was like, rushing to Trump's door to try and negotiate their own rates. And I think probably the UK are probably the best of the bunch in terms of what we've achieved. So again, there's this one sort of plus for Brexit is that we're not stuck with 20%, which is the Europeans have got. So again, there's exemptions to this. So and services aren't included. So it's kind of a bit of a headline thing to protect manufacturing and help job growth in the States. But I don't think it's as bad as people think. And also, economists are now saying that the tariffs are not having the inflationary effect that they were due to have in the States. So,
You would think that you would think it would create inflation, though, wouldn't you?
yeah, I mean, it wasn't
If
the
suddenly your
experience.
Mercedes is going to be 20% more in terms of cost.
That's right. It seems to not feed through. I mean, look at the last time when Trump had some tariffs, that had no effect either. And maybe it's just being absorbed elsewhere, or yeah, it's just not coming through in mainstream inflation numbers because perhaps the majority aren't affected by the sort of like luxury end of where tariffs have an impact, like cars, as you say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting stuff. And of course, I believe that as far as he's concerned, um, Rolls-Royce and Airbus aren't affected. But of course, the bulk of Airbus is in France, isn't it? I mean, we're just making the wings. Rolls-Royce obviously doing some of the engines, but I'm not quite sure how that works out in terms of the EU relationship.
Yeah, it's like anything. There's nothing. You can't simplify things down to sort of one country, one product. 'Cause everything's made all over the place nowadays. It's never that straightforward. But again, because there's a military implication for these parts, like Rolls Royce, this is probably where the Americans are coming from. I think.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you're right as far as that's concerned. Um, Boeing seems to be in difficulties that have been going on for a long, long time now. Several air
Yes.
crashes.
Yeah, I mean, this is a interesting case in point with technology. Obviously, there's a new CEO now, so
Yeah,
things seem to be improving, and the machinist strike is over. But had historically been a cost-cutting culture, which is not what you want when you're dealing with aircraft, really. But
I don't
it goes
think
back
so.
to this thing of industry executives having share options because the obvious thing is to maximize output and minimize costs.
Yeah,
And it's interesting that with the Alaska, when the doors blew out or something, it was because that there was one veteran engineer who was on holiday when this particular work was being done. It just goes to show that, I mean, my brother's an engineer, and I can completely understand this, that they had this almost sixth sense of the knock-on effects and how things work in three dimensions, which
yeah,
AI can't do, or people fresh from engineering degrees won't get. And it's that almost like the depth of knowledge that you have with some people is invaluable. And in fact, the veteran involved, he'd been binned off previously, then re-employed him. So it just goes to show this: cost cutting is potentially, literally, very dangerous.
yeah. Reputation is everything, isn't it, in air
Yeah,
travel? And if you sort of look at the fact they've had three fatal air crashes in what 5, 6 years, something like that.
yeah. This is it's pretty scary. There's very much um, a, an anti whistleblowing culture there as well. So it's hopefully the new guy will sort it.
Somebody said it was better to fly on one that had been made in Seattle than one being made, in Georgia or wherever the other
This way,
manufacturing plant is.
I'm curiously quite pleased with our little Aurigny propeller planes. I feel a lot safer.
Yeah, absolutely. What about Google? They've obviously got a big monopoly, haven't they,
Mm.
as the principal browser? And it looks as if that someone's trying to sort of carve them up a bit in terms of saying, you've got to there's got to be alternatives. How do you see that working?
Well, there've been a couple of antitrust actions against Google because they will. It's like a lot of sort of behemoth monopolies. They will try and dominate their position, also try and dominate other areas, yeah, i.e., advertising, which is the lifeblood of the search engines. Um, I think it in. I think with this peak is going to reverse naturally because of AI. What I'm finding is that even with the rubbish search engines that use Microsoft Bing, which is not much use, but I prefer to use Google, but with their Copilot service, I'm actually finding much better in-depth answers sometimes.
Mm,
So it's just one of those times where the biggest and mightiest that sort of Goliath will fall to the David sometimes.
mm.
So I think there will be a natural reversal of this dominance, and other big players and also new arrivals were coming in gradually to reverse this because the quality of the AI answers is getting a lot better and a lot more informative. So rather than just saying, it's not just answering a question, it's actually building up and providing a lot more meat to the bone, which for me is kind of cynical about AI. Is quite a surprise.
It's incredible though, really, isn't it? Everyone will say with a vacuum cleaner, I'm going to hoover the lounge, yeah? And with browsers, you don't say, "Oh, I'm going to get into my browser." You say, "I'm going to Google it."
Exactly, it's kind of it's like Hoover.
Yes,
It's
yeah,
not a
yeah.
vacuum cleaner, it's a
And
Hoover.
every motor scooter, irrespective of what it was a Lambretta. It's these sort of things that catch on.
Get stuck in
And,
the
yeah,
psyche.
absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you see this question of decarbonisation targets, given the fact that, would appear that the grid's going to be insufficient to carry the load? People won't be able to charge their cars unless they can get the vehicle off road and everything else. It's just, seems to be the impossible, in my view.
Yeah, I could actually do a full session on 30-minute session on this topic alone because I find so much of it absurd, and there's an almost like a cult attached to this idea of carbon being the enemy. It's very much like the 19th century when had Dr. Malthus saying the populations can't possibly grow because the food production won't keep up,
Yeah.
and there's always something that comes along which changes it. And if you listen to alternative people and going back to Google, they use algorithms to suppress alternative arguments which don't fit the mainstream. And if you do listen to a minority of voices who aren't biased because of funding grants and government assistance,
Mm.
you find out things like, for example, carbon as a lags temperature. When you stick it on a chart over X number of years, it looks like it's the cause, and it goes back to this causation and correlation. So, from my point of view, this stampede towards decarbonisation will come to a natural end, and we got the first signs that this is happening, partly from the performance of ESG investments, which have been very poor recently, and the kind of exodus of money going out of it. I'm kind of positive in a way because the absurdity is, it will just become so obvious. It's like the king with no clothes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you say you've been in Portugal and Spain, like I was in Porto recently, where it was pretty hot, and you start cutting aircon and the like, and the grid falls over. It's just absurd. So yeah, I could rant on. I won't go on
Well,
about
perhaps we'll have a rant about this, on the third call. Something like that. But it is an interesting thing. Defence costs on the increase.
it.
Looks as if they're trying to fiddle the numbers a little bit in terms of what's actually going to go to the armed forces and what's going to be used for security and stuff like that. Did you get that impression?
Yes, it's a double-edged sword that a lot of these projects will inevitably become more about tyranny and control because you just say, oh, it's to fight this great external enemy. We're going to impose these restrictions or impose greater, facial recognition, digitalization. It's a natural creep towards tyranny, and all you get is one little bit of it at a time. But if
Mm,
you know the big picture, you can see exactly what
mm,
Western governments are doing. So yes, that they will increase the spending. It's all guns or butter routine of the 1930s, and I'm sure there'll be effectively an arms race coming because there's a clique in Washington, so-called neoconservatives or neocons, who want war at any cost, and all the narrative is pushed towards greater rearmament, more spending on defence, and often that they'll be wasted on capital projects, which or useless things like these carriers, which
yeah,
you can't crew. There's not enough people to get on board. So yeah, the answer is there is a stampede towards rearmament. I know places like Spain can't keep up, but wars are preceded by exactly these events. So I think yes, we did step back from an escalation by having this American intervention, but I think the trend is towards greater conflict, and some people seem to be addicted to war, and
yeah.
often it's not their families who have to fight it, of course.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's the old story. It's the politicians that create the problem in the first place, but when it comes to actually being in the field of conflict, they're not there.
Good
You
old
know,
public, yeah.
yeah, very much so. Um, Changing the subject totally, did you get a chance to look at the GPEG report on the states of Guernsey accounting standards?
I saw I haven't seen the report itself. I
No.
did see some comments to do with there's like a public sector accounting
That's right. Yeah.
methodology, which kind of fills me with dread. You see, public sector and transparency just doesn't is an oxymoron. I mean, anything's better than nothing, and often we've seen, particularly in Guernsey, this talk of deficits, and there's very little definition going on about what these really are. So there might be an overspend, but the investment portfolio could do better one year. So a lot of it's scaremongering to try and bring in
Mm,
GST or
yeah.
VAT, as people know it
Yeah.
in the islands. And so you've got to be very wary about headlines that, we've got a deficit, we must increase taxes. And of course, and I'll have this written on my gravestone, increasing tax rates decreases tax take. That's what
T. Birch,
said.
2097 or something like that, hopefully.
Oh,
But,
but
it's interesting. But of course, as far as having financial credence, you've really got to have a situation if you're an island like Guernsey or Jersey or anywhere else, that your accounting system is good. And I don't think that's the case, quite honestly. And GPEG certainly don't.
no, it sort of ties in with this kind of this secrecy, and we're not critical of the islands from a sort of financial point of view,
Mm,
or being a so-called tax haven, but there is an element of like the Guernsey way, or
mm,
this is how I've always done it.
mm,
A government like loves darkness because they can hide, and when you see the kind of the outrageous spending that goes on in like legal cases, and you get like flickers of
mm.
transparency, a little torch shone on what's going on. But it just shows you what there's probably a lot more under the surface we don't see. So any move towards transparency is great. I'll wait to see if it happens personally.
Yeah, yeah. At the moment, Mr. McDowell describes it as sweet shop accounting.
That's great.
Okay, well, I'm giving him the credit there. I'm not taking it
Oh,
myself. Now, to finish off, you never guess what happened last week?
yeah. Yeah.
I got my final 2023 tax assessment.
Oh,
The
wow, that's
final.
pretty good. Well done. Uh, Better than most. Gosh.
And it's
What's the Monty Python phrase? Oh,
well,
you're lucky. Yeah.
I told you what happened when I did it online, first time
No.
ever. It's
Okay.
I finished all the input, and it said Guernsey tax owes me 10 grand.
Wow, no way.
Yeah, well, of course, there's no way, but there's obviously something with it. So I checked it all through. Christian checked it as well, and
Yeah.
it's still showing 10 grand. And in actual fact, it's come back that I owe them a couple of £100. So,
Oh
but I
dear.
mean,
Yeah.
to get to 2023 is quite an achievement, and I think
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
hopefully by the time we have our next meeting, Toby, I'll be able to report that my tax affairs are fully up to date.
Oh, fantastic. But tax office can't say the same. But
Anyway, as ever, good to see you. Thank you very, very
and
much for your
you,
time. Always enjoy our chats about these things, and we almost sort of put the world to right, don't we?
well, almost.
Anyway, till the next
Okay,
time.
good to see
Thanks,
you. Yeah.
Toby. Cheers.
Have a
Bye.
good summer. Cheers.